Since the war began, Putin has operated on one core belief that shaped almost every decision he's made about defending his own country. The front line was far away. Ukraine's drones and missiles belonged to that front line, hundreds of kilometers south and west. A problem for soldiers in trenches, not for ordinary Russian cities going about their normal lives. Putin built an entire architecture of air defense batteries, layered radar coverage, and scrambled fighter jets specifically to guarantee that belief stayed true, that the deeper you traveled into Russian territory, the safer you became. And of every city inside that supposed shield, one was treated as the safest of all. St. Petersburg, Putin's own birthplace, the city that shaped him, ringed with some of the most concentrated air defense coverage anywhere in Russia. That belief did not survive the night of July 23rd into the 24th of July 2026. At around 3 a.m., two separate columns of thick black smoke rose into the sky above St. Petersburg at the exact same time, one from the Shushiri district inside the city itself, the other from the village of Novosaratovka, miles away across the Leningrad region. These weren't two unrelated fires. They were two simultaneous strikes, hitting two different targets in one of the most heavily defended cities Russia has. Residents filmed it from their own windows in the dark, the kind of footage that spreads instantly because it captures something people were told could never happen where they live.
Вы это видите? Это просто пиздец. Я ночью спала, я ничего не слышала. У меня обычно крепкий сон. Когда я проснулась утром, я увидела вот это. Меня до сих пор трясет.
Somewhere in the chaos above the city, a Russian helicopter scrambled into the sky and was caught on camera dropping water onto the warehouses struck earlier that morning in a desperate effort to bring the fire under control. As the attack unfolded, a Russian fighter jet was seen in the skies overhead, chasing a single Ukrainian FP-1 drone. The aircraft darted across the sky, trying to intercept it before it could reach its destination. The jet failed. The drone, a machine that costs roughly $55,000, kept flying straight through some of the most concentrated airspace defense in the entire country and reached exactly where it was heading. By sunrise, the damage had already reached the skies above the city in a different way. Roughly 50 commercial flights were delayed out of St. Petersburg's Pulkovo airport, one of Russia's busiest, and more than a dozen aircraft had to be diverted elsewhere entirely. A city built around the idea that the war simply did not reach this far had just watched its own airport grind to a halt because of a single overnight strike. Here's the part of this story that should genuinely stop you. Whatever you're picturing right now, a military base, a weapons depot, an airfield, you're picturing the wrong thing entirely. What actually burned in Putin's own hometown that night wasn't a military target at all. And the reason that detail matters more than almost anything else in this story is exactly what we're about to walk through. What those two fires in St. Petersburg actually destroyed were two massive logistics warehouses belonging to Wildberries, the company Russians use for online shopping the exact same way Americans use Amazon. Clothes, electronics, medicine, household goods, the everyday deliveries an ordinary Russian family orders without thinking twice. That's what was burning above Putin's hometown at 3 in the morning. And here's the detail that changes everything about how you should be watching this story. St. Petersburg wasn't the beginning of this. It was the ending. By the time those two warehouses caught fire, Ukraine had already been running this exact campaign for an entire week, hitting Wildberries facilities across Russia one after another, region by region, night after night. The story begins on the night of July 17th into 18th, not near the front line, but deep inside Russia. Ukrainian drones targeted Kodovsk in Tambov Oblast, about 650 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian-controlled territory and 480 kilometers from Moscow. At the same time, another strike reached Elektrostal, just outside the capital. This was the single deadliest night of the entire campaign. 8 people were killed and more than 70 others were injured when drones struck both warehouses within the same operation. The fire at Elektrostal alone burned for 3 straight days and was visible from more than 200 kilometers away. Tambov Governor Evgeny Pervyshov claimed their air defenses had shot down 28 drones before they ever reached the target, but the warehouse burned to the ground anyway. 2 nights later, the campaign moved again. Ukraine sent over 400 drones toward the Moscow region in a single wave, striking a Wildberries logistics complex near Podolsk and a separate massive distribution hub outside Domodedovo, one so large it also served other major retailers operating in Russia. Then it moved south. 2 more Wildberries facilities were hit in Krasnodar and Novosibirsk. Over 100 firefighters and a specialized helicopter were sent in to fight the blaze. Wildberries founder Tatiana Kim herself confirmed the strikes publicly, region by region, as they kept happening. By the time drones reached Voronezh the following night, the company had already tried to adapt, announcing it would stop operating its warehouses overnight to reduce the risk. The decision came too late to matter. The Voronezh facility was struck anyway, its roof and outer walls damaged in the exact hours the new safety policy was supposed to protect it. Which brings the timeline full circle, back to St. Petersburg, back to those 2 fires you saw at the very start of this story. According to Tatiana Kim, by that final night, Ukraine had struck Wildberries facilities in 8 separate Russian regions, plus occupied Crimea over the course of a single week. Not one lucky strike, not one isolated incident officials could quietly explain away. A sustained, expanding region-by-region campaign that Russia's own air defenses could not stop, no matter how many drones they claimed to intercept along the way. So here's the question worth sitting with as this story keeps unfolding. Out of every possible target inside Russia, oil refineries, weapons factories, military bases, why would Ukraine spend an entire week of coordinated drone strikes, burning down warehouses that ship out shoes, phone chargers, and children's clothing? The answer to that question is not nearly as simple as it looks on the surface, and it starts with a number that explains exactly how much of Russia's daily life actually runs through this one company. The number that explains everything is this. Wildberries handles more than half of every single online order placed inside Russia. Not half of clothing sales, not half of some small category. Over 52% of all online orders in the entire country, for everything from sneakers to prescription medicine to phone chargers, flow through this one company's warehouses before they ever reach a customer's front door. To understand exactly how enormous that footprint really is, compare it to the closest thing America has. Wildberries, founded in 2004, is the leader of Russia's retail sector, controlling more than 40% of the Russian market, and together with its main competitor, Ozon, up to 70%. Wildberries controls a bigger slice of Russia's entire online economy than Amazon controls of America's. Ukraine wasn't just picking a warehouse. It was picking the single largest pressure point sitting inside Russia's daily civilian life. And this platform doesn't just move consumer goods. According to a Moscow-based company that analyzes online retail in Russia, somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 independent Russian sellers rely on Wildberries as their entire livelihood. Small business owners with no other real channel to reach customers across a country that spans 11 time zones. Hit this one company hard enough, and you're not striking a corporation. You're striking the income of hundreds of thousands of ordinary families at once. Now here's where this story takes a turn that Russia's own government has been actively denying in public, and it's the twist that actually justifies everything Ukraine has been doing for the past week. Wildberries claims it's a purely civilian company selling nothing but ordinary consumer goods with zero connection to the war effort whatsoever. That claim falls apart the moment you actually open the website and search it yourself. The marketplace offers a large number of dual-use goods, including drones, sitting openly on Wildberries, available for anyone to buy with a few clicks, are DJI Mavic 3 and Mavic 4 drones, the exact reconnaissance drones being used on the battlefield in Ukraine right now, alongside first-person view strike drones and even the release mechanisms used to drop explosive payloads from them mid-flight. Some of these listings don't even try to hide what they're for. Products are tagged directly with phrases like tested in the SVO, using Russia's own official shorthand for its war in Ukraine, and marketed as the choice of soldiers actually fighting on the front line. Body armor, tactical helmets, ammunition pouches, and military-grade radios sit right alongside the baby clothes and kitchen appliances. Furthermore, the toys and electronics sections, which formally are not categorized as drone equipment, contain a large number of training or children's drones. Journalists at the Associated Press and reporters at Kyiv Post independently confirmed all of this themselves, screenshotting the listings in real time. Analysts reported that military and battlefield-related items make up roughly 1% of everything sold on the platform. On a company generating somewhere around $30 billion a year, that tiny slice still works out to hundreds of millions of dollars in war-related goods moving through Wildberries annually. If you're enjoying this detailed analysis, take a second to subscribe. We break down complex military operations using maps, verified sources, and clear explanations you won't find in the headlines. Now, let's see what Zelensky has to say about these attacks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made this connection publicly and directly. He described that the warehouses are legitimate military targets, stating outright that they were being used to supply Russian forces with drone components, navigation equipment, and other hardware feeding the front line. The Kremlin's official response was flat denial. Officials insisted, on the record, that Wildberries warehouses had no connection to military supplies whatsoever, treating the entire accusation as baseless. Which means the Kremlin made a public denial that anyone watching this video right now could disprove for themselves in under 60 seconds, simply by opening the Wildberries website and typing a single search term into the box. That gap between what Moscow claims and what's sitting in plain sight online is the exact kind of contradiction that turns a controversial military decision into something a lot harder to argue against. But none of this, the fires, the losses, the shattered businesses, would have been possible without one specific machine, and understanding exactly what that machine is reveals just how far this war has actually traveled from the front line everyone assumed was the only place it could reach. The machine responsible for almost every fire in this entire campaign is called the FP1, and it comes from a Ukrainian company most people outside the defense world have never heard of. Firepoint was founded back in 2022 by 3 people with backgrounds that sound almost like the setup to a joke: a former film location scout, an IT entrepreneur, and a concrete producer. Today, that same company employs roughly 3,700 people. What that small founding team built is a long-range strike drone with a maximum range of roughly 1,600 kilometers, with a warhead capacity between 6,100 and 20 kilograms, built using radar-absorbent materials and designed to fly low, hugging terrain to slip beneath the gaps in Russia's long-range radar coverage. Each one costs approximately $55,000 to build, which is less than the price of a mid-range family car back home. That range number matters enormously once you place it on an actual map. St. Petersburg sits roughly 1,100 kilometers from Ukraine's border. Comfortably inside that 1,600-kilometer envelope, which is exactly why a city everyone assumed was untouchable turned out to be well within reach the entire time. And production of this machine isn't some small boutique operation either. By the middle of 2026, Firepoint was manufacturing somewhere between 100 and 200 of these drones every single day, spread across more than 50 separate manufacturing sites scattered around Ukraine specifically to survive any single strike against the supply chain itself. The company has already produced over 5,000 units and has publicly stated a target of building more than 100,000 across all of 2026 alone. As reported by Firepoint co-founder Denise Stillerman, right now we calmly produce about 200 aircraft per day, and we can very quickly double or triple these capacities. That production scale explains something that would otherwise make no sense at all. On the night St. Petersburg was hit, Leningrad Region Governor Alexander Drozdenko publicly claimed Russian air defenses had intercepted somewhere between 33 and 59 drones overnight. On paper, that sounds like a resounding defensive success. Except 2 massive warehouses still burned that same night. A third facility in occupied Crimea was hit in the exact same operation, and Pulkovo Airport still ground to a halt regardless. Russia can genuinely intercept dozens of drones in a single wave and still lose the fight entirely because Ukraine simply isn't sending dozens. It's sending enough that a meaningful number always slip through no matter how many get shot down along the way. That's the uncomfortable mathematics sitting underneath Russia's entire air defense strategy right now. Every single interception Russia proudly announces is proof of just how many drones Ukraine is actually launching at once, because you don't need to stop every drone in a swarm to win. You only need enough of them to reach the target. And at $55,000 a unit, with over 100 rolling off production lines every single day, Ukraine can afford to keep sending them until enough get through. Russia cannot afford to keep replacing what those drones destroy at anywhere close to the same pace, and that mismatch, cheap and endlessly renewable against expensive and increasingly scarce, is exactly what turned 1 week of strikes into over $1 billion of damage before anyone in Moscow could find a real answer. Now think about that. Once those warehouses really did start burning, who were the people left holding the loss? And what happened to the businesses and the families standing behind every single one of those fires? A cosmetics founder named Svetlana Dodo posted a video online after her own losses hit, describing herself as completely out of strength, saying every entrepreneur she knew was standing in the exact same state of shock she was in. Dodo, who has spoken publicly about raising a disabled child while building her business entirely on her own, said she lost close to 1 million rubles, somewhere around $12,800, in a single night.
Заебали эти предприниматели вечно ноющие, да? Я вот тоже на них нахуй смотрела и думала, заебали. Заебали нытики нахуй, я, блядь, мать, блядь, инвалида, ребенка, блядь. Сама нахуй. Все, блядь, сделала. Бренд, блядь, уходовой косметики создала с нуля в своем маленьком городе. На Озон продаюсь, на ВБ, с ФБ вот ушли.
Then there's Oleg Kondrateyev, co-founder of a women's clothing brand called Airbase, based far from Moscow in Kazan. He lost roughly 5 million rubles, close to $64,000 worth of stock in a single strike. Speaking to Reuters, he laid out exactly what that loss actually does to a small business in real time, not in some distant future, but starting immediately. He told the reporters that his sales through Wildberries had simply stopped, and he couldn't pay his loans that were already due. His tax bills hadn't arrived yet, but he already knew he wouldn't be able to cover those either once they did. He said he was hoping for a payment deferral from the government or from his bank, otherwise he could become the next Russian business owner to file for bankruptcy. He also told Reuters he intended to fight Wildberries in court, all the way to the country's highest level, to try to recover what he'd lost. Wildberries did eventually respond, though not with anything close to full compensation. The company announced it had begun releasing initial payments to roughly 88,000 of its smallest and most vulnerable sellers, along with a 3-month freeze on loan repayments running through the end of October. Founder Tatiana Kim said the funds would land in affected sellers' accounts within 24 hours of approval. But sellers who actually received those payments say the money fell well short of what they'd actually lost, a partial gesture rather than a real solution, arriving weeks after the contract change had already stripped the company of any obligation to pay them back in full. For hundreds of thousands of ordinary Russians, the machinery that burned their warehouses was only half the story. The other half was watching a corporation quietly walk away from responsibility for the exact disaster it had legally protected itself against less than 2 weeks earlier. 11 days. That's the exact window sitting between one quiet corporate policy update and the first drone strike that turned this entire story into a national crisis. On the 7th of July 2026, Wildberries rewrote the terms of its contract with every single seller on its platform. Buried inside that update was a single change that would end up mattering more than almost anything else in this entire war's economic side story. Wildberries added drone strikes, missile attacks, and artillery damage directly into its official list of force majeure events, circumstances the company would no longer be financially responsible for under any condition. In plain terms, that means the company legally protected itself from ever having to pay a single ruble to sellers whose inventory got destroyed by exactly this kind of attack, 11 days before the first warehouse ever caught fire. Now, to be fair to the full picture here, this wasn't necessarily proof that Wildberries had secret advance warning of this specific week-long campaign. Wildberries was very likely protecting itself against a rising pattern of risk it could already see building around Moscow. Not a single leaked tip about what was coming next. But intent barely matters once you look at the outcome. However, Wildberries reached that decision, the result was identical either way. The company quietly shielded its own balance sheet from exactly the disaster that was about to unfold, while hundreds of thousands of ordinary sellers had absolutely no idea the rules protecting their livelihoods had just been rewritten underneath them. And here's the number that shows exactly how exposed those sellers actually were the moment those warehouses caught fire. According to multiple reports, the destruction of the Wildberries warehouses has caused losses approaching $1 billion. Much of that cost is expected to fall not on the company itself, but on thousands of independent sellers whose inventory was destroyed in the fires. Industry data cited by the Russian business outlet Kommersant found that only somewhere between 5 and 7% of Wildberries merchants carried their own separate insurance policy at all. It gets worse from there. Of that small handful who actually had insurance, only somewhere between 10 and 20% of those policies even covered anything related to sabotage or military damage in the first place. Which means the overwhelming majority of sellers on this platform were standing completely unprotected, with no safety net whatsoever, the exact moment Ukraine's drone campaign began. So picture the actual position hundreds of thousands of ordinary Russians found themselves standing in without ever being warned. They had built real businesses, shipped real inventory, and trusted a platform that quietly stopped protecting them less than 2 weeks before the fires started. No insurance covering most of them, no warning given to any of them. And a legal contract, rewritten in the background, that left the company entirely free to walk away from the damage about to land on their doorstep. Robert Madyar Brovdy, the commander overseeing Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, who personally confirmed the final St. Petersburg strikes, summarized the entire week in a single line that captures exactly what this campaign was actually designed to do. He said, "Several million people watched billions burn, billions that could have gone toward funding the war instead. For 4 straight years, Russia has treated Ukraine's shopping centers, delivery networks, and retail warehouses as legitimate wartime targets, forcing millions of Ukrainian civilians to feel this war every time they tried to order medicine or pick up a package. What happened to Wildberries this July wasn't Ukraine inventing a new, crueler kind of warfare. It was Russia, for the first time at real scale, standing on the receiving end of a tactic it had been using against its neighbor since the very beginning." So here's where this leaves things as of right now. Wildberries is still operating, still fulfilling orders, still processing payments to at least some of the sellers who lost everything. But the production line building the drones that did all of this isn't slowing down, it's scaling up, and the target list of large, flat-roofed, impossible-to-hide Russian warehouses is nowhere close to running out. Which leaves one question hanging over everyone who just watched Putin's own hometown lose to a $55,000 machine. If a shopping warehouse in the safest city in Russia isn't safe anymore, what exactly is? That same cheap machine, expensive damage logic isn't staying confined to warehouses either. Ukraine is already applying it to something far more serious than a shopping habit: the Frontline itself. In our last video, we showed you exactly how far that idea has already gone. A mission where Ukraine sent an unmanned boat across the Black Sea, carrying an armed robot onto Russian-held sand, and opened fire without a single Ukrainian soldier ever setting foot on that beach. Russian troops on the other end genuinely could not figure out where the gunfire was coming from, because for the first time in this entire war, there was no soldier pulling that trigger at all. If burning warehouses with $55,000 drones unsettled you, watching Ukraine replace the deadliest maneuver in military history with a machine that costs less than a used car will unsettle you even more. Go watch it next, because Ukraine is not stopping anytime soon by finding cheaper, safer ways to make Russia pay a price it can no longer afford, on land and at sea alike. This is the Frontline show, and this war is moving faster than almost anyone is prepared for. We'll see you in the next one.